wrap up in time.
About to put a. We'll be live in a few seconds.
Let's do it.
There we go. We're live.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. Give 10 seconds, see if anybody joins that might be online.
Mhm.
And then we'll talk about tariffs today.
Okay.
Any holidays in America coming up?
Holidays.
I miss American holidays, man.
There's no holidays left, man. You'll be working. At least I know I will be.
No, Europe's
Probably
got a
July
lot of
4th.
holidays in the middle of the week. You get like a holiday on a Tuesday or Thursday.
Yeah. Well, July 4th is the only one I can think of that's coming up in a couple months.
No, Memorial Day, end of the month, right?
Oh, see, totally forgot because I'll be working. It's irrelevant for me.
Interesting. Okay, well, today me and Brian are here to talk about tariffs. We'll go through some of the basics, the current landscape, how it affects your business, whether you're a product-based business or a service-based business. We're not trying to make this about the politics of it. It's just about what we're going to have to plan to make sure that all of us are successful in business. Whether there are or not, or tariffs are removed, both of those scenarios impact your business. So I think it's something that we all have to consider because there's a lot of changes happening quickly, and
Yeah.
it's not just by one direction. It's also bi-directional, especially as businesses like ours, aren't just might not just be local, they're international, or even as a local business, you're bringing in a product externally. So, just as a basic definition, tariffs are taxes imposed on imported goods, sometimes on exported goods, but generally they're made up of taxes paid upon importation. So in the case of any of our products, basically when they're at the port of entry of the country we're in, so in Malta, we'll have already, in theory, paid the VAT, which is the taxes and the tariffs that are necessary for that product before release. So they'll have a receipt showing us that we've paid, and then they'll release it. And these prices are generally passed on to the businesses that are going to purchase, and then the consumer at the end. Because if me as the importer are going to be paying an additional 20% or 15%, I've got to pass it down to the consumer. And the reason they exist is to help with domestic industries, right? So there isn't a world where you're going to make, especially labor intensive processes, cheaper in the US as compared to, Asia, Africa, South America. Labor costs are significantly lower there. So, just on a production basis, there are a lot of industries that are labor intensive that trying to get better cost out of the US market would mean that with tariffs, you could make the price of that product imported in this country a little bit more on par with what you would create locally. There's a couple types of tariffs. There's the ad valorem, which is basically a percentage, 20%, 30%, whatever it is, base value. There's specifics, so on things like steel or things like this, you'll have volume based, so it's like, oh, $10 per ton. And then you'll have what Trump's doing right now, which is some of the retaliatory ones, which is where you look at what another country might set on you and then use it as an exact opposite to the barrier of entry. So they impose 10%, you impose 10%, or you impose 20%, and you go back and forth as a negotiating tactic generally. Most of the time, you're trying to create trade policy that isn't singular industry. You know, the things that they have in Kenya are not the things that we have in the US. So when you put a tariff on coffee beans in the US to export into Kenya, Kenya is not going to gain anything from this because there are very few places in the US, just basically Hawaii and the Southwest, that make coffee versus in Kenya, there's lots of coffee that they export. So a
Mm.
lot of times people will think that, oh, there's not bi-directional tariffs, but those tariffs will be offset, on another industry that the US might export actually more into Kenya. So this is kind of the basics of what we need to understand going into what are the tariffs. Some of the current situations, if as accurate as we can be today, you're looking at about like 1.2 trillion dollars of goods are being tariffed, and these are primarily, let's say, from China, but across the board, you're looking at a minimum 10%, for any countries, and it's going to be also on small packages. So things like Timu, things like those products that used to be exempt are no longer exempt. And this was something that same thing in the EU, which fortunately has not changed. It's generally anything under 50 or 100 euros. If you're importing it from outside of Europe, you're not paying any importation tariffs based on what might be local. But anything larger quantities, then you start doing this. You're also starting to see a lot more tariffs on steels, aluminum, machinery, textiles. I believe just yesterday it was announced that there's 100% tariffs on movies produced outside the US. I don't know if that's movies and TV shows or if that's strictly movies, but we'll see in the next coming days as the policy is um, more written out. Uh, the macroeconomic effects, right? So some people will argue about GDP fall, loss of jobs, uh, but at the same time, you're going to be spending more at home because the goods will be coming up. However, what the government is also looking at is will this also increase government revenue because those products are going to sell? And if those products aren't purchased from the foreign importation goods, will then that market cap be filled in by the local competitor, also helping to increase the local economy?
Yeah, and I think some things that we definitely need to talk about is some of the key business impacts by sector, right? So here in the US, again, these are projections, as close as we can get it with the data that we have accessible to us. Rex and I, being originally from the Detroit area, this is kind of near and dear to our heart. For example, like a company like General Motors, they're estimated to have between $4 and $5 billion in losses in 2025 from tariffs. Ford Motor Company, another big, one of the big three automotive companies out there, $1.5 billion tariff-related financial impact is what they're looking at right now. In the e-commerce sector, you're looking at potentially up to a 54% small package tariff from China, which will severely affect direct-to-consumer and dropshipping models. On apparel, 104% tariffs on Chinese imports and 46% on Vietnamese imports. Something like Wonder State Coffee, right, big coffee brand, they're projected to have an extra $300,000 of annual cost due to some of the green coffee import tariffs that they're going to have to deal with. Major construction firms, they'd have higher input costs for steel and aluminum delay projects, and it's going to reduce their profit margins, obviously.
And you saw
Service,
that
mhm.
exactly with when you were talking about the apparel and things like this. Amazon just recently almost went in and started putting into their pricing on the website how much was actually the tariff versus the product
Yep,
because
yep,
this was negatively impacting Amazon. It's starting, the consumer will start to think that Amazon is charging you more, where in this one case, Amazon was
right.
not charging you
They're not trying to charge you more.
more.
They have to pass that tariff on to you. It's not their fault. Um,
Exactly.
or they'll lose it on their margins, which I don't think that's right. I don't think that, that's the way it should be. They're having to deal with the tariff. They unfortunately have to pass that cost on to us, right? Otherwise, it's going to negatively impact their business.
And I wouldn't
Um,
mind it. I wouldn't mind knowing how much I might be paying for a tariff on a product because it might influence. I've never had to consider it as part of my sales purchase. Maybe I choose the product from Thailand versus China or
yeah,
something
sure,
like this because of that situation. But
sure.
it would be definitely something interesting because you could really find out how much the product costs.
Yeah.
you
And
know,
here's a big one, right? So service-based businesses too. I want to make sure we touch on this. Obviously, with a lot of clients having to, unfortunately, being delayed in their forecasting, revenue projections, their revenues being, impacted, they're going to deal with, unfortunately, slower client budgets, or they're going to have slower, budgets, and then there might be some project cancellations. For folks like me and Rex, we do a lot with consulting. I offer, different marketing related and coaching type of services in my business. So that's absolutely potentially going to help, impact me, unfortunately. Hospitality businesses might absorb higher costs for imported amenities and food products. Digital advertising budgets reduced or will be reduced potentially as retail clients cut back on their campaigns. Um, Financial service providers, especially small banks, they face rising credit risk. SaaS firms, software as a service, they might start to see reduced demand due to some of the increased hardware costs. and slower, client procurement or longer sales cycles because of that.
Yeah,
Hybrid business.
a lot of people look at service-based businesses and think that there are no product costs. No, even a service-based business has operational costs. You know, if every piece of paper is going to cost me more money, if every bit of data on the server is going to cost me more money because of electricity and all of this, even though I'm a service-based business, these are all costs that I'm going to have to absorb because they are necessary to my operation. So a lot of people think that tariffs only impact the actual product goods, but just like Brian was saying earlier, across the industry, service-based industries, you're going to have impact because of the ancillary items that touch into your ability to service your client.
Yeah, and with hybrid businesses, businesses offering both physical goods and services, like technology companies that bundle hardware with consulting or SaaS, they're going to face dual pressure because there's going to be higher input costs and lower client budgets. So, in a circular economy, those types of brands and sustainability-driven startups, they're among the hardest hit, or they will be among the hardest hit from things that we're learning. Subscription businesses, even with a physical fulfillment. So something like curated boxes, monthly coffee shipments, etc. They're going to see higher delivery and input costs. So it's really going to impact a lot of us. It's not just going to be a certain industry or a certain sector. There will be a lot of businesses that are impacted.
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at tariffs as something that just happens outside of their business model because most businesses that operate inside the US, you won't ever be in a situation where you're involved with customs to pay for a tariff, but as part of your duty, or even, some of our clients that work in the medical industry, when we do delivery, um, we do door-to-door delivery, which means that our logistics company even takes care of ensuring the customs and everything is managed. So the client just pays a fee at the beginning and the product is at their door. So they're not even aware of how much work our team goes through to get, you know, customs and clearance and things like this, and tariff process. Generally, when you're working with products, can get kind of confusing, especially if they're not clear and they're implemented hastily. So we're hoping for as much clarity as possible. And like we said before, tariffs have been used to protect domestic industries, right? So you don't want certain industries to go out of balance because you don't have that ability to compete against a foreign market. Um, Now they often offer short-term relief for local producers, um, but historically the economic impacts have often been mixed or negative. You're increasing import costs, and that it'll lead to higher consumer prices and retaliatory tariffs, reducing trade and economic growth in general. Because just like Trump said the other day, maybe you're not going to have $30, maybe you're only going to have two or three, but they're going to cost more, right?
Yeah.
And again, we're not saying quality is going down and that there isn't a need for a kid not to have $30 and maybe they only have three. But this, as a business, is something that when you're pricing out your models and you're deciding inventory, we've had clients that have had this issue, and we'll talk about strategies in a few minutes. Um, just some historical examples. You can look at the United States. They supported, they used tariffs to support industrial growth, but then it started becoming a regional issue. So businesses started going to certain areas. Um, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in the 1930s raised tariffs on over 20,000 goods. Global trade dropped 65%, deepening the Great Depression, increasing unemployment, and severely damaging stock market. So we have examples in the U.S. In the 1950s, in the 1960s, Japan tariffed a lot of their manufacturing sectors, but this just resulted in higher consumer goods,
Mhm.
which then they removed, helping them enable more exportation growth. Because this way they could focus on getting products out because they could sell them for more than products that were brought in. India that has the same issues, and this is something that it can have short-term impacts, but the problem is a lot of the things that we talk about nowadays, it isn't as quick to spindle up. So if I even something as simple as want to make a glove manufacturing facility, that's 2 or 3 years before I can get that facility off the ground. In those 2 or 3 years, somebody will come fill that market space. And by the time I finish my facility, I won't be competitive again. So a lot of times when we're looking at our business models, when tariffs like this happen, we need to consider it. How much stock do we keep? We've had clients that are across industries, from apparel to TV, t-shirts, shoes, stockpile in the first quarter just for the fear of tariffs.
Mm.
And this, unfortunately, is one of the strategies that is practical to reduce your exposure. If you knew that, 100 or 200% tariff was going to be implemented potentially, it might be cheaper to get another warehouse in America and hold a huge amount of stock for the year than risk taking that 100 or 200% hit. And the other thing right now, and in the US, it's not as easy, but to diversify your supply chains. And this is where, a lot of Clinical Group does a lot of work where we focus on ensuring our clients don't focus not just on diversification of country, but diversification of companies, countries, and regions so that any type of localized issues don't end up affecting your longer term strategy for your company. Um, this is not about tariffs, but everyone currently knows there's a couple wars going on in the European Mediterranean region. We had a client and colleague of ours that was in the furniture industry, and one of the things that they did was import furniture from Ukraine. And
Mm.
this was their sole provider for their entire furniture business. Ukraine war happened, and now they have no more supply. And they also don't have any other relationships. So now what do? Because you have orders from your clients that are supposed to be on the way, they're not coming. And now you don't have a way or another place to go get them. So this is something that product-based businesses really have to focus on. And then shifting your pricing strategies, like we talked about earlier. The way Amazon did it, maybe you have to make a more clear and communicative way to your clients to ensure that your client knows that you're still getting that high quality product. Yes, the price went up. There's a tax hike or a tariff hike, but it's not because you're trying to price gouge them, but because of the current economic state, and that this is what we have to do. In the service based business, reposition your essential services. Look at all the processes that you do and look at where you're going to have to forecast what is the next 3, 6, 12 months going to look like in both aspects. If the tariffs continue to rise, stay the same, or go down. There's been some significant changes because we're fully aware that when they announced these tariffs from on the US side, that this was for to bring people to the negotiating table to get better deals done for the US. So this is something that you have to consider because if a better deal isn't done, what is the long-term goal? If in the case of China, it's going to be very interesting for my industry and the pharmaceutical industry to see a lot of medical devices that are going to be manufactured out of Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, and India who don't have the same significant hit in tariffs and can stay a little bit competitive with China, which means now they might be cheaper than the Chinese product. So this is something that is going to be very interesting to see and how it pans out in the next few months and the next few years. But as a service-based business, make sure you're adapting your pricing model. Make sure you're widening your client base because this way you can at least, as unfortunately as you may have clients that suffer a little bit, you'll have more clients to help service, keep your business running, and look for ways to offer additional services to your portfolio that don't increase your product costs. That just look at adding value in a revenue side where it's simply a service. Now, one of the big things and for hybrid models, you need to be able to do both sides. Which side of your business is going to get impacted more? For us, things like coffee and medicine are highly impacted because every country already had tariffs. So re-identifying the process, especially when we're moving products, something that we had manufactured in India or China might come get tested and released in Europe and then need to be sold to Iraq. Well, now we've got to pay tariffs 3 steps of the way. So understanding that and then adjusting along the way, making sure that our team knows that we need to be aware of where our clients are going to have to spend money and get them that information as soon as possible so that they can also make the best choices moving forward. Um, and then, like we like to do, find ways to find free trade zones. So if you can find a new relationship in a country that has a much more stable relationship with your country, then you know that maybe you're going to have a better, outlook long term. I believe there's a 10% flat rate between the US and the UK. Maybe you switch over to a UK service provider. The US and the UK have a very good relationship, which means that agreement should only get better if we hope. But this is one really good way that you can, help your business grow. Now, stay informed. I generally don't think that every business should do this, but now during the last, I'd say, 8 years, being aware of the Office of the United States Trade and the World Trade Organization, you don't have to check the website every day. You know, once a month, once every few weeks, check, see if there's any changes on your products. They'll tell you exactly, hey, Kenyan green beans shipped to Europe, no tax. Kenyan green beans shipped to the USA, 15%. Use tools. There's tons of financial forecasting tools out there. Build out scenarios to simulate what you might think your margins will be. You're not going to be able to predict your sales, but really look at what the impact will be on your margins, because looking at what your margins will be will know if you need to change your price, and then you can start to really, look at how it's going to impact your business long term. Now, we can always say negotiate with your suppliers and clients, but they're going to have the same issues. So there has to be a level of understanding. Um, yes, you want the best price and you'd like to keep everything the same, but you need to be able to share the risk. And if you do things like this, most people will collaborate with you so that you both can be successful. Um, no manufacturer in China wants to lose 15% of their clients because of the tariffs. They also would like to keep their production as high as possible and keep their relationship with their client forever. And then, if you're able to, cash management, strengthen your liquidity positions, and reevaluate all your capital investments. Right now might not be the biggest time to spend all your money on marketing if you know people don't have money to buy your product. So,
Right.
really look at what you're going to do, position yourself for success, and you know, just like business, it's about learning and understanding and adapting. So I know Brian and me, you know, like we talked about last week with the grants, you wake up one day and you're wondering what's happening. You're wondering if everything's gonna be okay tomorrow. It will be okay tomorrow. You don't know how, you don't know what you're gonna make it okay, but if you're a good entrepreneur, you're a good business owner, you're gonna be able to find a way to get through any of these adversities to get you to where you want to go. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments. If you have any other comments, we'd love to hear from you. Please join us. We have another live session next week on personal branding versus business branding and how it affects your strategy. And if you'd like to lead a live session, send a message to our admins. Otherwise, have a great week, and we'll speak to you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
See you.